Hey all you Hillmaniacs, it's Hillmanator, and today I figured I'd tell you what I've been up to this week. So as most of you will be aware, we've been at exam season for the past month and a bit in Lancaster, and I've just had my first written exam this week. In fact, I've had two. My hands are now exhausted, and I don't know how I'm going to go on in life. Luckily, I don't have another exam until the 19th. But equally, I want to tell you what my exams were like, because why not? So my first exam for this year was on the 4th, and it was an interesting day. Of course, in the film exam there were 10 questions that we were allowed to pick from, but we had to do 3, and we couldn't do them the same as any of the essays that we'd done before. I woke up, and my body immediately went, "Hey, it's 10 o'clock. And you're late to your exam and you might as well just curl up in a ball and cry for hours on end because everything you do in your life will be a failure." Then I realised that it was 5 AM and I still had a couple of hours to go until my exam. So I got to the hall for 9:30 and I sat down, and it was my film exam. I've revised for all of my exams, but I was not remotely ready, I didn't feel. But then I saw the questions. The first question on the paper was all about framing and how they frame the characters and the objects within the particular scenes. So I was allowed to choose from any of the films that we saw on the course, and I figured the one that had the most interesting use of framing was actually a film that was released during the French New Wave era of cinema, which is called Vivre sa vie, which I believe translates to Life is Beautiful. It's got quite an unusual composition in terms of the way it's shot, so I figured that was actually quite an interesting choice. I feel like that one went okay. It wasn't the best of the essays on there. Next up was a question about colour, and again I could choose any of the films that we had studied on the course, but unfortunately I'd already used Jaws and Psycho in a very similar question on my essays like 2 terms ago. I didn't want to just be repeating myself, obviously, so instead I ended up doing another film I watched during first term, which was a weird kind of movie called Don't Look Now. It's very odd, but the more I think about it, the more I seem to like it. And basically, I spent the entirety of that essay just writing about the colour red, and how it can represent death, and also how it can represent the future, and how in theory it can represent both of these things at the same time. Because I'm a film student, I need to be pretentious on that point. Finally came a question which I had to answer on one specific film, which was all about the film This Is England from 2006. I'm not sure whether any of you would remember that, but I only watched it like 2 weeks ago for the first time, because I missed its initial screening, unfortunately. I was ill during its initial screening, and so I had a very good memory of it, fortunately, but unfortunately, it wasn't actually technically about the film. It was about its director and what it meant to be a regional filmmaker. Luckily, I had enough reading on that topic to actually get by, and hopefully I've done decently on that exam. Then yesterday I had my RS exam, which, as most of you will know, is the first of my 2 major exams, because I have joint honours of majors. I do philosophy and religious studies as my majors, and film is my minor. So technically my first exam was the least important. And RS I felt even less prepared for, because religions, they're complicated. So the way the RS exam works, it's divided up into 5 sections. There's one on Hinduism, one on Buddhism, one on Christianity, one on Islam, and one on new religious movements. Now we had to pick 1 question from the new religious movement section, and 1 question from 3 other sections. So you could have Buddhism and Islam and Hinduism, or Christianity and Buddhism and Hinduism or something, and basically I decided that I would do Hinduism because it's the one that I'm not exactly overly familiar with, but I remember it quite well. And then Christianity, for obvious reasons. I feel like I've got about, 19 years of experience on that one. And then, luckily for me, I still remembered all of my notes from my A-level exams on Islam. So I was just able to do that again. By the way, when I say new religious movements, it technically is more about religion and its relationship to modernity, but new religious movements were covered in it. I should have started with the question on Hinduism because it was the first one on the exam, but I decided to jump straight to Christianity, get that one out of the way because it's the one that I know the best. Then I would go back to Hinduism because I'd be feeling confident on it. Then, once, I'm finished with Hinduism, I can transfer over to Islam, which again, I know a little bit better, so it's a good progression. And then lastly, I can move on to new religious movements because I had no idea what I was going to write on that one. So the first question I answered was, as I said, about Christianity, and there were a number of stinkers of questions in this paper, but luckily I managed to pick the ones that I thought were the nicest. So my first question for this paper was to explain 3 core Christian beliefs. Shoot, how am I going to do that? I don't know any Christian beliefs. I feel like I did fairly reasonably on that. I talked quite a bit about just the basic ideas of Christianity, so that made sense. Then we moved on to Hinduism, where I had to describe the Atman, karma, and yoga, which are all not exactly what you probably think they are. They're all a little bit more complicated than the majority of Western society understands them as. The Atman is the eternal path of something, but it has massive differences to the soul, so it would take me forever to explain. Karma has far less to do with bad things happening to you now in your current life, and far more with your reincarnation in the cycle of samsara. And yoga is less about the stretching and all of that lot, and more about self-discipline actually. It's all to do with discipline in the original context. Then, as I said, I transferred over to Islam, and for that paper I decided that the question to do would be the one where I got to compare it to other Abrahamic traditions, because that would make my life easier. I can go into depth about multiple religions, so yeah, why not? So I essentially spent most of the time comparing the prophetic lines of Judaism, Christianity and Islam, as well as the ideas of a messianic figure. And then at the end I tied all 3 together as monotheistic religions which were founded in polytheistic societies and were heavily persecuted for it. With the Jews it's quite clear, there's significant persecution for thousands of years in their history. With Christianity, the Romans were exceptionally strong in their persecution up until when Constantine made it legal. And with Islam, there was the entire Quraysh tribe which were trying to hunt down Muhammad while he was still in Mecca, which is why he had to move to Medina. And how do I think that those exams went? Well, I wasn't feeling remotely prepared for either of them. I didn't think I had revised enough, even though I've been revising quite a bit. And I was, I wouldn't say stressed, but I was mildly worried before each exam. And now I'm not. I feel like the exams actually went pretty darn well. A lot of the stuff that I had revised for both of the exams didn't come up, but the stuff that did come up was stuff that I knew really, really well. So I was able to just get around it anyway, and that made my life so much easier. So hopefully I've passed on those exams. If I haven't, then it'll be embarrassing. Oh well. I've only got one more exam to go now, which is my philosophy exam. As I said earlier, it's on the 19th. And I am again hoping that that one will go well. The interesting thing is, that's also the day that I move out of this accommodation. So it's going to be an intense day. Anyway, I am going to leave it right there. I hope that you've enjoyed this video. I hope that someone has learned something, and that it hasn't just been me saying that I'm going to do well and then ultimately failing. Okay, thanks for watching all. I shall catch you next time.